You are lying awake at 2 in the morning. The room is silent. The video you were watching ended an hour ago. The conversation you had earlier keeps replaying in your mind. The distraction is gone. The notifications stopped. Nobody is talking to you. Nobody needs anything from you. And for a brief moment there is nothing left between you and your own thoughts. Then it appears. Not as a sentence, not as a voice. More like a feeling. A strange discomfort that seems to come from somewhere deeper than logic. Something inside you whispers that there is a question you have spent your entire life avoiding. Not because nobody asked it, not because the answer is impossible, but because if you truly faced it, something about the way you see yourself might never be the same again. Most people think the biggest questions in life are about success, purpose, love, death, faith, meaning, happiness, or destiny. But what if there is a deeper question hiding underneath all of them? What if every decision you make, every fear you carry, every belief you defend, every dream you chase is secretly connected to a single question that almost nobody wants to examine honestly? And before you immediately dismiss that possibility, think about something. Have you ever completely changed your opinion about something you once felt absolutely certain about? Maybe it was a political belief. Maybe it was a relationship. Maybe it was a career path. Maybe it was something you defended passionately for years. At one point it felt obvious, it felt undeniable. You could not imagine thinking differently. Then one day, something happened. A conversation, a book, an experience, a painful realization. Suddenly the certainty cracked. What once looked obvious now looked incomplete. What once felt true now felt questionable. And the strangest part was not discovering something new. The strangest part was realizing how confidently wrong you had been before. That realization is uncomfortable because it forces us to confront something most people hate admitting. Human beings are not nearly as objective as they like to believe. We often imagine ourselves as truth seekers, rational thinkers, independent minds. But psychology repeatedly shows something different. We tend to search for evidence that confirms what we already believe. We tend to avoid information that threatens our identity. We tend to protect our worldview long after cracks begin to appear, not because we are dishonest, not because we are unintelligent, but because certainty feels safe. And uncertainty feels dangerous. Think about a child learning how the world works. They trust what they are told because they have no alternative. Their understanding of reality is built from parents, teachers, friends, culture, experiences, fears, rewards, and expectations. Little by little, a map of reality forms inside their mind. The problem is that eventually most people stop updating the map. They continue defending it, protecting it, living inside it, even when reality begins offering evidence that the map may be incomplete. This is where the question begins. Not the question itself, just the doorway leading toward it. Because before anyone can face the question honestly, they have to admit something unsettling. It is entirely possible that some of the things they feel most certain about deserve a second look. And if that possibility makes you uncomfortable, pay attention to that discomfort. It might be more important than you think. In fact, if this feeling has ever crossed your mind, if you have ever wondered whether some of your deepest assumptions deserve to be challenged, leave a comment and share your perspective. Not because there is a right answer waiting, but because very few people are willing to admit they have wrestled with this at all. The strange thing is that life often forces this confrontation, whether we want it or not. Imagine someone who spends 20 years chasing success. They believe reaching a certain income will finally make them feel fulfilled. They sacrifice time, relationships, health, peace of mind. Eventually they arrive at the destination they spent decades pursuing. Then something unexpected happens. The satisfaction fades almost immediately. The happiness they imagined does not arrive. Suddenly they are left staring at a reality they never prepared for. What happens next? Many people double down. They tell themselves they simply need more success, more money, more recognition, more achievement. Others pause and ask a terrifying question. What if I was chasing the wrong thing? That moment changes everything because it is not really about money. It is about identity. It is about discovering that the story you built your life around might not be the complete story. The same thing happens in relationships. Someone spends years believing that finding the perfect person will finally make them feel whole. Then they find that person. For a while, everything feels magical. Then the familiar emptiness begins returning. The loneliness they thought would disappear is still there. The insecurity remains. The fear remains. The restlessness remains. Once again, they face a painful possibility. Maybe the answer was never where they thought it was. Maybe the problem they were trying to solve existed at a deeper level than they realized. Notice the pattern. Again and again, life presents situations that challenge our assumptions, yet most people focus on defending the assumption rather than examining it. Why? Because questioning our beliefs can feel like questioning ourselves. And that leads us closer to the question that changes everything. But not yet, not quite. First, there is another uncomfortable truth worth considering. Many people spend their entire lives asking how they should live, without ever asking why they want what they want. Think about that carefully. Why do you want the goals you pursue? Why do you fear the things you fear? Why do certain criticisms hurt more than others? Why do some opinions make you angry while others do not? Why do certain ideas immediately attract you while others make you defensive? Most people answer these questions on the surface. Very few go deeper. Yet beneath every belief sits another belief. Beneath every desire sits another desire. Beneath every fear sits another fear. Like layers of an onion. Reality often becomes stranger the deeper you go. A person may believe they want wealth. But underneath that desire is a need for security. Underneath security is a fear of vulnerability. Underneath vulnerability is a fear of rejection. Underneath rejection is a fear of insignificance. Suddenly, the pursuit of wealth was never really about money at all. It was about something much deeper, something emotional, something existential, something human. The same applies to nearly everything. This is why people can spend years solving the wrong problem. They address the symptoms while ignoring the source. They rearrange the furniture while the foundation beneath the house quietly cracks. Then one day life forces them to notice. Sometimes through heartbreak, sometimes through failure, sometimes through success itself. And that is what makes the question so powerful. It does not merely challenge your opinions. It challenges the framework from which your opinions emerge. It does not ask what you believe. It asks something much more unsettling, something much more personal. Before we reach it, consider one final scene. Imagine two people standing side by side. Both appear confident. Both seem certain. Both defend their views passionately. From the outside, they look almost identical. But inside, they are completely different. The first person has examined their assumptions repeatedly. They have questioned themselves, faced doubts, considered alternatives, changed their mind when evidence demanded it. Their certainty is tempered by humility because they understand how easily human beings can fool themselves. The second person has never truly questioned anything important. Their certainty comes from familiarity rather than understanding. Their confidence comes from repetition rather than examination. Which person would you trust more? Most people immediately choose the first. Yet here is the uncomfortable twist. Almost everyone assumes they are the first person. Very few consider the possibility that they might be the second. And that realization leads directly toward the question that quietly waits beneath ambition, beneath relationships, beneath identity, beneath belief, beneath fear. The question that has the power to rearrange an entire life if answered honestly. But before we go there, think carefully about your own experience. Have you ever discovered that something you were absolutely certain about turned out to be incomplete or wrong? If you have, share that experience below, because what comes next depends on understanding something many people spend years trying to avoid. The greatest obstacle to truth is rarely ignorance, it is attachment. And until someone understands what they are attached to, they cannot fully understand themselves. The reason this matters will become impossible to ignore once the real question finally appears. The moment usually arrives when you least expect it. Not during a debate, not while reading a book, not while watching a video. It often appears during an ordinary day that should have felt completely normal. You are driving home after work, sitting alone after everyone has gone to sleep, looking at an old photograph, cleaning out a drawer filled with forgotten memories. listening to a song that suddenly reminds you of a version of yourself that no longer exists. And without warning, you become aware of something strange. Your life has been moving forward for years, yet much of what motivates you has never been consciously chosen. You inherited parts of yourself, you absorbed them, you adopted them, you carried them forward. But did you ever stop to inspect them? Most people assume self-knowledge is automatic. They believe that because they live inside their own mind, they understand themselves. Yet some of the most important forces shaping human behavior operate beneath conscious awareness. A person can spend decades believing they are pursuing freedom while secretly being driven by approval. Another can believe they are motivated by love while actually being controlled by fear of abandonment. Someone else may think they are defending truth while protecting identity. This is what makes human psychology so unsettling. We are often the least reliable narrators of our own story. Think about how many times you have justified a decision after making it. How many times you explained your behavior only after the behavior already occurred. We like to imagine that reasoning comes first and action comes second. In reality, emotions, instincts, habits, fears, desires, and unconscious motivations frequently act first. The explanation arrives later. It feels rational. It sounds convincing. But it may simply be a story designed to make us feel coherent. This is why the question that changes everything is so difficult to face. Because it threatens those stories. It threatens the explanations we use to make sense of ourselves. It threatens the comforting narratives that help us avoid uncertainty. Imagine someone who has spent their entire life pursuing recognition. Every achievement feels meaningful because it earns admiration. Every accomplishment produces validation. Every success creates a temporary feeling of worth. Then one day they encounter a disturbing possibility. What if nobody ever noticed? What if nobody applauded? What if nobody cared? Would the achievement still matter? At first the question feels unfair, even insulting, but that emotional reaction reveals something important. Sometimes the intensity of our resistance points directly toward what we are afraid of discovering. The same pattern appears everywhere. Someone believes they value honesty above all else. Then they encounter information that challenges a cherished belief. Suddenly, honesty becomes more difficult. Someone claims they prioritize freedom. Then they face an opportunity that requires uncertainty. Suddenly, security becomes more attractive. Someone says they want truth. Then truth threatens their identity. Suddenly, comfort becomes more appealing. Human beings are full of contradictions. Not because we are flawed beyond repair, not because we are hypocrites, because we are complex creatures trying to balance competing needs. We want truth, but we also want certainty. We want freedom, but we also want security. We want growth, but we also want comfort. We want transformation, but we fear losing the familiar version of ourselves. This tension exists inside nearly everyone. The problem is that many people spend their entire lives pretending it does not. They create an image of who they are and defend it relentlessly. Over time, that image becomes a prison. Every new experience gets filtered through it. Every challenge gets interpreted through it. Every contradiction gets ignored or rationalized. The image survives, but the person stops growing. Think about the most significant turning points in your life. Chances are they were not moments when everything confirmed your existing beliefs. They were moments when reality disrupted them, moments when something no longer fit, moments when an assumption collapsed, moments when certainty cracked. Those experiences hurt because they force adaptation, yet they are often the experiences that produce the deepest growth. A relationship ends and reveals patterns you never noticed. A career failure exposes motivations you never questioned. A personal loss forces reflection you had been avoiding. An unexpected success reveals that achievement alone cannot provide meaning. Again and again, life invites us to examine ourselves more honestly. The invitation is rarely comfortable. That is why so many people decline it. Instead of examining themselves, they search for distractions. Endless entertainment, endless consumption, endless noise. Anything that prevents them from sitting quietly with their own thoughts, because silence has a way of exposing things. When the distractions disappear, uncomfortable questions emerge, regrets emerge, contradictions emerge, doubts emerge, possibilities emerge, and eventually, if someone remains honest long enough, they arrive at a realization that feels almost impossible to ignore. The realization is this: many of the things they believed were choices may actually be responses. Responses to fear, responses to pain, responses to loneliness, responses to childhood experiences, responses to social pressure, responses to emotional wounds. Suddenly, the story becomes much more complicated than it appeared before. A person who always needed to be right may discover a fear of feeling insignificant. Someone obsessed with control may uncover deep anxiety. Someone constantly seeking approval may realize they never learned how to validate themselves. Someone endlessly chasing success may discover they are running from a feeling rather than pursuing a goal. These discoveries can feel devastating because they dismantle the image we have carefully constructed. Yet, they can also be liberating. Because once you see the hidden forces influencing your life, you gain the ability to relate to them differently. You stop being controlled by them without realizing it. You begin making conscious choices instead of automatic ones. But this transformation requires a willingness to face something most people avoid: radical honesty. Not honesty with other people, honesty with yourself. The kind of honesty that asks difficult questions without immediately rushing toward comforting answers. The kind of honesty that can sit with uncertainty instead of fleeing from it. The kind of honesty that is willing to discover something unexpected. If you have ever experienced a moment where you realized your real motivation was different from the one you had been telling yourself, write about it below. Those moments are often uncomfortable, but they reveal more about human nature than years of certainty ever could. And now we are getting closer. Much closer. Because all of these reflections lead toward a single realization. Every belief, every desire, every fear, every ambition, every identity, every worldview, every personal story eventually encounters the same challenge. A challenge so simple that most people overlook it, yet so powerful that it can transform how a person sees themselves forever. Imagine removing every label you use to describe yourself: your job, your accomplishments, your failures, your political views, your social roles, your beliefs, your history, your reputation, your possessions, your status, everything. What remains? Most people have never seriously explored that question. They know who they are in relation to things. But who are they without those things? The discomfort you may feel when considering that possibility is precisely why it matters. Because beneath all the identities we construct lies something far more fundamental. Something that cannot be reduced to achievements or opinions, something that exists before the stories begin, and the question that changes everything is waiting there, not in your beliefs, not in your accomplishments, not in your explanations, but underneath them all. The closer you get to it, the more resistance you may feel. That resistance is natural. After all, if a question has the power to alter the way you understand yourself, your mind will instinctively try to protect the existing framework. It will offer distractions, arguments, rationalizations, excuses, anything to maintain stability. Yet stability and truth are not always the same thing. Sometimes the most important discoveries begin where certainty ends. And in the next stage of this journey, the question itself finally steps into the light, not as a clever philosophical puzzle, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a mirror. A mirror that has the potential to reveal something many people spend their entire lives avoiding. You are sitting alone after a difficult day. Maybe nothing catastrophic happened. Maybe nobody betrayed you. Maybe no disaster occurred. Yet something feels heavy. Something feels unresolved. You start replaying conversations, decisions, regrets, hopes, fears, the future, the past. The version of yourself you wish you were, the version you are afraid you might become, and eventually, whether you realize it or not, every one of those thoughts begins orbiting around the same center, the same hidden concern, the same invisible force, the same question. Here it is, the question that changes everything. What if I am wrong about myself? Not wrong about a political opinion, not wrong about a philosophy, not wrong about a specific belief, wrong about who I think I am. At first, the question sounds simple, almost disappointing after all this build-up. But stay with it, because this question is far more dangerous than it appears. Most people spend their entire lives constructing an identity. They collect experiences and build a story around them. They decide what kind of person they are. They decide what their strengths are, their weaknesses, their purpose, their limitations, their value, their future. Little by little, the story solidifies. Eventually, it feels permanent. It feels obvious. It feels true. But what if the story is incomplete? Think about the quiet person who believes they are weak because they spent years avoiding conflict. Then one day a crisis emerges and they discover extraordinary courage. Think about the person who believes they are unlovable because of past rejection. Then they experience genuine acceptance and realize the rejection never defined their worth. Think about the person who believes they are destined to fail because failure has followed them for years. Then they succeed and discover their identity was built around an outdated conclusion. Again and again, human beings mistake experience for essence. Something happens to them, and they assume it reveals who they are. But experience does not always reveal identity. Sometimes it merely reveals circumstance. A child grows up being criticized and begins believing they are inadequate. A teenager is rejected and begins believing they are undesirable. An adult experiences failure and begins believing they are incapable. Over time, these conclusions become part of the self-image. The story hardens. The person stops questioning it. They do not merely experience insecurity. They become someone who believes insecurity is part of their identity. Yet what if those conclusions were never fully accurate? What if they were interpretations rather than truths? What if they were emotional responses rather than objective observations? Suddenly, the question becomes much more powerful. What if I am wrong about myself? Because if that possibility is real, then many of the limits you accept today may not be limits at all. They may simply be assumptions. This realization explains why some people remain trapped even when opportunities appear. They do not reject the opportunity because it is impossible. They reject it because it conflicts with the identity they have constructed. A person who secretly believes they are unworthy struggles to accept love. A person who believes they are incapable avoids challenges that could prove otherwise. A person who believes they must always be strong suppresses vulnerability even when vulnerability is exactly what they need. The prison is not external. The prison is psychological. The walls are made of stories. Stories repeated so often that they no longer feel like stories. They feel like reality. Now think about how often fear disguises itself as certainty. Someone says they cannot change. Someone says people never change. Someone says life will always be this way. Someone says there is no point trying. These statements often sound rational. Sometimes they even sound wise. But beneath them there is frequently something else. A desire to avoid disappointment. A desire to avoid uncertainty. A desire to avoid discovering that the story might be wrong, because if the story is wrong, then responsibility appears, possibility appears, freedom appears. And freedom is more frightening than many people realize. We often imagine freedom as something everyone wants, but freedom carries risk. Freedom means accepting that the future is not predetermined. Freedom means accepting that you may be more capable than you currently believe. Freedom means accepting that your identity is not fixed. That realization can feel terrifying because certainty, even painful certainty, often feels safer than possibility. This is why the question changes everything, not because it provides an answer, because it transforms the way you approach answers. Instead of asking what you should believe, you begin asking whether your assumptions deserve examination. Instead of asking how to defend your identity, you begin asking whether your identity reflects reality. Instead of asking how to protect certainty, you begin asking what uncertainty might teach you. Suddenly life becomes less about defending conclusions and more about exploring them, less about preserving an image and more about discovering what lies beneath it, less about pretending you already know who you are, and more about remaining open to what you might become. That shift changes relationships. It changes careers. It changes personal growth. It changes spirituality. It changes the way people interpret success and failure. Because once someone genuinely accepts the possibility that they may be wrong about themselves, curiosity replaces arrogance, humility replaces defensiveness, growth replaces stagnation. The goal is no longer to prove a story. The goal becomes understanding reality more honestly, and perhaps the strangest part of all is that this process never truly ends. There is no final moment where a person achieves complete self-knowledge. Human beings are constantly evolving. Experiences change them, relationships change them, loss changes them, love changes them, time changes them. Every stage of life reveals something the previous stage could not see. The person you were 10 years ago could not fully understand the person you are today. The person you are today cannot fully understand the person you will become 10 years from now. This is not a flaw. It is part of being human. Yet many people resist it. They cling to old identities long after those identities stop serving them. They continue carrying stories that no longer fit. They continue defending conclusions that deserve revision. They continue living inside maps drawn by versions of themselves that no longer exist. And that is where the deepest realization emerges. The question that changes everything is not really about discovering a hidden answer. It is about developing the courage to keep asking, what if I am wrong about myself? What if there is more to me than my fears suggest? What if my limitations are not as permanent as they appear? What if my failures do not define me? What if my successes do not define me either? What if I am larger than the stories I tell myself? Those questions do not provide certainty. They provide something more valuable. They create space, space for growth, space for transformation, space for honesty, space for possibilities that would otherwise remain invisible. And perhaps that is why so few people ask them seriously, because once the question enters your life, you cannot completely ignore it anymore. It follows you into relationships, into decisions, into moments of doubt, into moments of triumph. It quietly asks whether the story you are living is the only story available, whether the identity you defend is the whole truth, whether the person you believe yourself to be is the person you must remain. Some people hear that question and immediately silence it. Others spend years wrestling with it. A few allow it to transform them, not by giving them certainty, but by teaching them something far more powerful: the willingness to remain open, the willingness to examine assumptions, the willingness to admit they do not have themselves completely figured out. And paradoxically, that humility often leads closer to wisdom than certainty ever could. Because the moment you stop assuming you already know exactly who you are, may be the moment you finally begin discovering who you can become. And once that possibility becomes real, everything changes.